Hello, welcome. As folks are getting connected and we're getting started, if everyone would just chat, name, organization, and how many children's advocacy weeks slash days you've been to. No, I've personally been, this will be my seventh rally at the Capitol tomorrow. Like I said, and like Valerie put in the chat, as we're getting started, please feel free to introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and how many children's advocacy weeks you've been to. Hello, welcome to today's Lunch and Learn Data and Storytelling. We are really excited to have my name is Corinna Cash, and I'm a Policy and Research Director with Kentucky Youth Advocates. Like I said, thank you all for joining us today, as well as for celebrating Children's Advocacy Week with us. This webinar is just one of the many great events that is going on this week. You can check out on our website to see the full schedule of other events, as well as more information about our rally in the Capitol tomorrow. As we get started, I also want to give a thank you to Aetna Better Health for being our signature sponsor, as well as all of our Children's Advocacy Week sponsors. This week, an event truly and honestly would not be possible without all of your support, and we are very grateful. So we want to go to the next slide. So here at KYA, we believe that what gets measured gets changed. We know that data is an incredibly powerful tool for advocacy and change making, and it guides all of the work that we do here, the policies we push for, the initiatives we have. So in today's Lunch and Learn, I'm going to talk about some of the data tools that KY offers, talk about the ways the data can be utilized for advocacy, give some tips on how to identify good data, and then my colleague, Valerie Frost, will walk us through how do we contextualize data via our own stories. To start, we'll touch on our signature publication, the Kids Count County Data Book. In November, we released our 33rd annual Kids Count County Data Book. This annual report measures child well-being in all 120 Kentucky counties across 16 different indicators. These indicators cover economic security, education, health, and family and community, and include data on a wide variety of topics such as childhood poverty, smoking while pregnancy, kindergarten readiness, youth incarceration rate, and more. To complement this book, we also have county profiles available on our website where you can view outcomes for just your county and share with your local legislators, your local leaders about the issues and the data impacting your county. In addition to our 16 different indicators, this year's book centers around what we are calling the kids workforce. These are the social workers, the coach, the school counselor, the child care teachers, and anyone else who works directly with Kentucky kids. This theme is explored heavily in our opening essay, where our executive director, Dr. Terry Brooks, walks us through the importance of those who are charged with keeping our Kentucky kids safe, educated, and on the path to prosperity, as well as the real crisis we are seeing in recruiting and retaining in the kids' workforce. We also dive into some creative solution to reward and incentivize those who devote their livelihood to our kids. In addition to the book's theme, there are a couple of other things in the book I want to highlight. First, as a youth-focused organization, so we can go. So first, as a youth-focused organization, it is really important to us that youth are heard in this book, and that they tell us what they need in order to improve the data that's directly impacting their lives. In this year's book, you will find a message from Kentucky's young people. I believe it's one of the first sections in the book, where you can hear from 6 youth and young adults about their goals in life. What kind of resources do they need in their communities? And what kind of policies and change do they need from their local leaders and from elected officials in order to make that successful transition from being a youth to adulthood? You can also hear from young people directly in the divider pages. Each of our 4 domains has a divider page attached to it where we did a deep dive on 8 different issues impacting Kentucky kids and families. 4 of these deep dives include a QR code where you can scan it and hear directly from a young person on the real life impact and experiences they had with the data being presented, as well as what they see through their own lived experience. In addition to these videos from young people, which are really, really great, and I would really recommend you checking them out, our divider pages also have some great tools that advocates can use for their policy advocacy. This includes deep dive overviews on the issues, additional data, fun graphs and charts like the one you see here for renters who are cost burdened, and recommended policy solutions. For example, the divider page attached to the chart you see on the screen explores the affordable housing crisis here in Kentucky, providing data on the impact housing insecurity has on families, talks about the return on investment for building homes and how that impacts the local economy, and calls on the General Assembly to invest in the state's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So, like I said, the Kids Count County Data Book is a really great big picture snapshot of child well-being throughout Kentucky. However, we know that there is far more data out there on child and family well-being than just those 16 different indicators highlighted in the book. So to complement the book, we have a host of other data tools available for advocates to use and tailor for their advocacy. If we want to go to the next slide. So the first tool I will highlight is our Kids Count Data Dashboard. This is an interactive dashboard where you can compare outcomes for 16 different Kids Count indicators by race and year. So this is a really great tool to see how different populations and Kentuckians are doing, identify racial disparities and outcomes, and look at trends over time. Also, in kind of that Kids Count universe is the Kids Count Data Center, which you can find at datacenter.aecf.org. This center features data on kids and family in all 50 states, and we have over 100 different data indicators on there that are specific just to Kentucky kids and families. So these includes data around outcomes of youth who aged out of the state foster care system, public benefit utilization, COVID-era education outcomes, school suspension rates, status offenses, and literally so many more. This is a really great tool for diving deep, as well as comparing Kentucky outcomes with outcomes in different states across the country. Moving out of the Kids Count world, we have a couple of different data tools for our various initiatives and policy priorities. The first one I will highlight is the Face It Data Dashboard, which is our home for child welfare data. For those of you who are unfamiliar, our Face It initiative aims to end child abuse here in Kentucky by promoting best practices, supporting communities and parents, and advocating for a better child welfare system. On this dashboard, topics such as rates of abuse and neglect, CPS reports, children in state custody, and child fatalities. This data is also broken down by race and region. Data is available. Next, we can talk about our Bloom Data Dashboard. So for those unfamiliar, our Bloom initiative aims to address adverse childhood experiences through public policy, with the goal to be improving outcomes later in life, including health, education, workforce participation, all of that. The Bloom Data Dashboard explores data on Kentuckians' experiences with adverse childhood experiences, as well as talks about some of the root causes of ACEs. For example, you can view data on things such as Kentucky kids who have a divorced parent, as well as data on Kentucky kids that live in high poverty neighborhoods. And this data is also available by each DCBS region, so you can get a little bit more targeted information for your community. Finally, on our data tools, we have our Blueprint fact sheets, which can help equip advocates with the talking points and data they need to advocate for the issues they care about. They also make a really, really easy leave behind for legislative meetings. Each of our Blueprint policy priorities have a fact sheet available on our website. You can get those at kyouth.org/blueprintky. And for those of you who will be joining us at the Capitol tomorrow, we will have a limited number of copies of these fact sheets available for advocates to grab and give to their legislator throughout the day. Like the slide says, and as I've spent the last 10-12 minutes talking about, KYA has a lot of data. However, we are not the only source of good, reliable data out there. And we know that every day we are presented with so much information and statistics on the internet, on social media, and in our daily lives that it can be really hard to sift through what is reliable and what is not. So if we want to move on to the next slide, we have a couple of different tips on how to identify good data, and then we'll also highlight some of the data sources we rely on a lot as we develop those fact sheets and put together our own data products. So, like I said, there's a lot of data out there, but not all of it is reliable. When we're going to legislators and talking about the issues we care about and in our community, we want to ensure that we have the most accurate data available, meaning there are a couple of things we really want to consider. I would say by far the main thing to consider is where is the data coming from? For example, is it coming from a government source, a peer-reviewed study, a poll, a tweet, or whatever they call it now? Generally, government sources are going to be much more reliable than polling data, and a peer-reviewed study is going to be more reliable than a published article by an undergraduate. Starting off by evaluating the source of data can give you a really good point to evaluate how accurate and reliable that data is, if it's a good thing to utilize in your advocacy. Next, when looking at scholarly articles, it can be really difficult to navigate finding them. A lot of them are hidden behind paywalls, which can be frustrating if you don't have that university connection. Two sources that I like to use to identify potential articles are JSTOR and Google Scholar. So JSTOR is a library of scholarly journals and academic articles. However, the downfall of JSTOR is that for a lot of their articles, it is behind a paywall, but you can generally read a limited number of articles each month for free if you sign up for an account. Google Scholar is another great tool to start identifying potential articles. It's free. It tends to be very accessible. However, I will say that it is not as rigorously reviewed as a source like JSTOR. So as you're reading through Google Scholar articles and identifying potential sources, just making sure you're verifying those sources, seeing where they come from, and that they are peer-reviewed from universities, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, wanted to touch on polling data. And when it comes to polling data, you have to be very, very careful. A lot of groups do polling, and polling around issues can be very partisan. When you see a poll come across, I would recommend looking at a number of different things. First, the number of people who are polled. A poll could say that 77% of Kentuckians prefer chocolate ice cream, but that number isn't super reliable if only 20 Kentuckians were polled, compared to 100,000 compared to a million. Second, looking at who is releasing that poll. Are they a group with a policy agenda or partisan lean? For example, on the chocolate ice cream poll, was it the chocolate ice cream lobby releasing that poll or something more objective? Looking at the political leaning biases of polling companies can give you a really good indication of the type of people were polled, why they were polled, and how accurate of a reflection that poll is to how Kentuckians feel or their experiences. Going to the next slide, we just wanted to highlight a couple of different data sources that we utilize a lot through our research and policy and advocacy. The first one is Child Trends. They are a national group that explores data on a host of topics around child well-being, such as early childhood, child welfare, poverty, juvenile justice, and trauma. The Annie E. Casey Foundation, they are the home of our Kids Count work, but they also publish really, really great data throughout the year. For example, they recently published their Race for Results report, which explores outcomes of kids in all 50 states by race, and ranks states according to how well they're doing in supporting kids of different races. They also have publications and data on a host of other things, such as foster care outcomes, a lot around young adults, and a host of other things. Moving on, we also rely a lot on university research. So universities here and across the country focus on different topic areas. I highlighted two specifically in the slide, but there's tons of them all over. So first, Chapin Hall is hosted at the University of Chicago and has some really, really great data on child welfare, the importance of prevention, and family economic security, while the Eviction Lab at Princeton University collects county level and community level data and research on evictions in America, so you can compare your county to counties in other places across the country. Finally, government websites and sources are a really great starting point for data on both the national and community level. The census is probably the largest database on data of the American people and economy, and it allows you to get really granular community level data all the way down to your census tract, your polling tract, and a number of different smaller and regional data. Like I said, really granular community level data. The CDC also has a ton of great data on health, youth behaviors, trauma. They do a lot of polling throughout the year, so another great source of data. And then in Kentucky, we also have Foster Facts, which is hosted through the Cabinet of Health and Family Services and tracks regional and statewide level data on child welfare here in Kentucky. So I know this was a lot of information that I just threw out of you, a lot of data. And we know that data can be really hard to conceptualize in large quantities. For example, it can be hard to imagine the scale and impact of 44% of Kentucky renters being housing insecure, especially if you don't know any renters yourself. This is where storytelling comes in. It gives us that face to data and can help take the data we see from an abstract number to real life. To help walk us through how to tell your story effectively for advocacy, I will turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Valerie Frost.
Okay, I've been holding on to this since you said it, but because you brought it up, Corinna, I now need to know what the official Twitter post is now called, X whatever. So, sorry, I can't give you all the answer. I did not do that research. I cannot provide that data for you at the moment, but if you are also curious, please follow up with me after this. So hi everyone, my name is Valerie Frost. I am Corinna's colleague here at KYA. But I've actually, little known facts, I've had the privilege of being in the advocacy space with her for a couple of years prior to joining the team here. So I am on the strategic initiatives team at KYA and generally focus on child welfare practice and engaging those with lived experience. Mostly also in the child welfare space. But a unique part of my position is that I have a plethora of lived experience, not limited to even just child welfare involvement, but also many other advocacy focus areas that KYA addresses. And so I do have opportunities to lend my firsthand knowledge to the data and research conversations and complement the work that Corinna does so well. So like Corinna said, now that we know what data is, we need to know what to do with it. Specifically, how do we use data to impact change? So storytelling is one of the ways that we use data to compel someone who either may not know about something or they may hold an opposing view. And so this can be done with reports. They, like Corinna mentioned, we have polling. We tell someone the data straightforward. It can also be done through, strictly personal sharing. But the process of storytelling for advocacy, it really brings those two together, and it can bring the data to life and make a situation or circumstance real and immediate, and move people to feel concern, to want to support, or drive them to action. And we can go to the next slide. All right. So basics of storytelling. I had a couple photos on the last one. That was me obviously running my mouth and I'm talking now. So I outside of my work, I'm a writer and a poet, so I'm perfectly fine to tell stories. But I think when you bring this to other people, they may say, well, I'm not a storyteller. That's not me. I can't do that. And that's completely not true. Everybody has a story to tell. It could be as simple as I was walking my dog down the street and this car just flew by and turned and almost hit me and my dog. That's a story. Taking that to advocacy, I think there should be a stop sign there. This is a really dangerous intersection, not safe for pedestrians. I'd like to ask that you put a stop sign there so that my dog and I can walk safely. So I mean, there people tell stories every day. You pick up the phone, you call somebody. Well, I don't know if we pick up phones anymore. I might be aging myself, but you grab your cell, call someone, send a text. I mean, we're telling stories constantly. So just the basics of storytelling. Who I believe everyone is a storyteller. Everyone has a story to tell. So what telling a story is when you share a moment or a sequence of events that changed you in some way or had some type of meaning to you. Um, when you tell stories, like I had said, I gave an example of we naturally tell stories all the time. You're running late to work, you call your boss, you're going to say something. For advocacy, stories can bring people together that are like-minded like you, that share passion for an issue. They can change the minds of decision makers who need to know what you went through. I don't know if you all have heard like nothing about us without us. There's a lot of people that make decisions for other people who don't, those people are not in the room. And so, when you advocate, you get to show up and you get to say, I'd like to put a face to what you're discussing right now. And it could be something that you're still going through. So why do we tell stories? When you don't tell your story, like I just referenced, your story can be told on your behalf. People can make assumptions, even well-meaning, just what they think would be really helpful for you, or people that are experiencing what you have gone through. Um, and so when you tell your story, you're bringing truth to the conversation, and you can open up someone's mind to a different perspective. So we can go to the next slide now. So I actually borrowed this from like a children's from like a teacher thing for elementary school. But we all did learn at some point the basics of a story, and they're still true. So we have little characters here, and we start off with who introduction. Who are we talking about? Is it you? Is it somebody else? Is it a group of people? When we get to rising action, what do they want? What's their conflict? After we've set the context, like what's happening? The climax here would be like, what was a barrier for them, or what was like that changing moment, an eye opener, and then coming back down. So I kind of put some examples like specifically for advocacy. Could be you. What did you need? What did you want? So wanted to walk my dog down the street safely. I wanted my dog to be safe too. What was in your way? This reckless driver who didn't slow down, was driving too fast on the street. The climax could be the moment that you got brushed by this car flying by. Your dog got scared. Um, so, I mean, whatever everyone learned back in school, it still applies. So it could be, kind of just going back to like parts of a story to like, what's the challenge? What's the conflict here? What did you have to gain or lose? Sometimes, talking about choice. So what did you do? How were you feeling at that moment? And then we'll kind of end up with the outcome. And a lot of times with advocacy, the outcome is it's not there yet. So you're proposing a solution. You kind of drive the narrative now on what the outcome should be or could be when you advocate. And you would use that by saying, what did you learn, or how did that situation, what did that bring to your attention that you should share now with somebody else? We can go to the next slide. Right. So more on how to tell a story. So this was created by a professor from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And this is the story of self, story of us, and story of now. So it's kind of layers to advocating and storytelling. Story of self would be kind of what I've just shared a lot of is, something happened to me. This is who I am. This is what happened to me. This is why it's important to me. So it's really touching on personal values, personal experience, personal want. Um, Story of us would be kind of pulling other people in. So it would go from I was trying to walk my own dog down the street to this is a problem for everybody on our block. All the dog owners here in this neighborhood have been struggling with this stop. So it's saying, this is something that I went through, but it's not just me. This is a us, more universal situation, and how it affects other people. And so that would tie kind of into like universal themes like recreation, walking a dog, enjoying a walk down the street, just needs safety, but pedestrian safety. Um, and then the story of now would be, to take that one step further. That's that call to action. So what needs to change? Obviously providing safety, having a speed limit sign in the neighborhood, putting a speed bump, putting a stop sign at the end of that street. So that would be, going from this happened to me, I'm not the only one this happens to, and this is what needs to happen now. Right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so I know I actually just made up the dog thing on the spot. So I did provide an example to help you out. I mean, there's many examples, but one of the issues that we would address would be economic security and family support. So an example could be talking about access to nutritious meals, healthy food, access to food in general, addressing, the universal theme of hunger. So an example for story of self would be me personally, I needed to get groceries to feed my family. So bringing that out to us and the collective, individuals and families need food for basic survival and to thrive. And that's, bringing that values piece in. Um, you know, Food access has immediate long term implications. Food is a basic physiological need that must be met. No one deserves additional challenges to obtaining food. So now would be what is that call to action when you're talking about food access? And that would be, your vision. What do you think needs to be changed? What is your ask? So that could be, I picture a community where everyone has food on the table, where every community holds themselves responsible for making sure everyone can get food, helps one another, especially during various seasons of life, such as sickness, injury, life changes, birth, loss, surgery, etc. This is not possible by adding additional obstacles, but removing unnecessary barriers. And then you can talk about there are many barriers to food access, unfortunately. And that's when you kind of make it more specific. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, I've given you all multiple examples on how to tell stories, but it really is. I want everyone to kind of stop for the next couple of days and see if they can catch themselves going into a story. But here's also another formula, and specifically for advocating, this would be really helpful. So let's say you set up a meeting with a legislator or you're talking to any decision maker. So you would want to share your purpose. Why are you there? People want to know, what you need from them, what you want. So, I've asked to meet with you today. I'm emailing you about, going back to I'm emailing you about access to food. So transition in your story. You can go back to that story of self. Why are you there to talk about access to food? Then you go back to, I needed help picking up my grocery order when I had surgery. And then you tell that story. I had, a temporary injury. I had to get surgery. I couldn't drive, or, I was home caring for an older family member or a young child. It was hard to get out of the house, or I was working two jobs, whatever's the story, kind of that rising action, obstacles. And then what did that situation mean to you? So you're kind of getting back to that image with the climax and all of that. What did that open your eyes to? So flexible options to obtain food for my family would have been really helpful. I don't know how we would have managed if we couldn't have groceries delivered during that time. And then you go to, what is your ask? So return to your purpose. And you would also say, um, go out to that, like what does that mean for others? So we're stepping out of that self, that individual story to now the collective, leading up into the call to action. So I realize that I'm not the only person that has struggled to obtain groceries at a different season of life. Everyone needs to get food on the table. Um, Having an additional barrier to obtaining food could be detrimental to an individual or a family. And this shouldn't be happening in communities. We're all doing our best to sustain ourselves and families. And then ending it with that, return to the purpose. Why did you come again? And also taking it a step further with that specific call to action. So, once again, I asked you to meet with me today to talk about access to food. And the call to action could be I want to make sure that everyone can access grocery delivery whenever they need to or whenever there's some type of emergency. All right. We can go to next slide here. Thank you. So just kind of recapping storytelling principles here. Everyone is a storyteller, you believe it or not. It's best to be authentic. Um, I had here to try not to overshare. I think that would depend on what kind of story you're telling. More specifically, like I mentioned, I do generally stay in the child welfare space. There's certainly, but even anything else, there are ways to tell stories to get to your point. If you stick to kind of the formula of what's the context, why are you there, who are you basically, what happened in that situation that really pertains to the call to action. What did that open your eyes to? What do you want the other person to know? You don't have to add in all these extra details, like when I was walking my dog that day, I was wearing my new tennis shoes and I just bought them 5 days prior. I really liked those shoes. My neighbor said hi to me while I was walking down the street. All that stuff is not really essential and it could, distract someone from what you're trying to talk about. So, it's you don't need to. You can say less. You don't have to tell everybody everything if you unless you want to. Practice. So, I know a couple months ago someone had asked me when I was presenting if it gets easier. Maybe for some people, I don't know. I think maybe I might be more used to it now, but I think everyone should practice, and it definitely helps. But also practice just kind of getting into the mindset of the formula, not actually memorizing, because I do want to. It's best to be authentic, and the story is within people. So just telling people what actually happened and what it actually meant is more raw. It's more real than reading off of a paper and having it every single line fit the formula perfectly. People know if you're being honest with them. So know your audience and purpose. This is important. If I were to pick up the phone and call Corinna and say, I want to talk to you about food access, I mean, it would be a different conversation than if I were going to Kroger corporate office or food bank, or if I was going to a legislator. I mean, I could probably start with the same story. Why am I calling them? I'm calling them about making grocery delivery available, waiving the cost of grocery delivery if there's an emergency. And I could tell them why and explain the story about how I had surgery. And that really opened my eyes to how many people don't have food when they have surgery. But knowing the audience would change, I may tell in a personal conversation a little more a little more emotions or more details than I would if I was calling just a professional that I don't know. So emotions can change a heart and mind. It's one thing just to go to somebody and say, research says that you should remove the price, and removing the price of grocery delivery in emergencies had this percentage of improvements for people's quality of life. But when you go up to somebody and they see you and they put a face to the issue and you say, I had surgery, I did not have food, I was home hungry. That's something that makes somebody, they feel something, they care, they want to do something. Um, so it can be really impactful, and it can really enhance, just the numbers. If there's something you're passionate about, have a story ready to go. So that's just going back to that practice. If you're telling your story more often, or people know who you are, they know that you've had an experience. You just don't know when you're going to have that elevator pitch moment where someone says, I've heard you talk about access to food before, and I want to know more about it. It's good just to be prepared if that's something that you are regularly advocating about or speaking on or known for. So natural is better than rehearsed. I think that most people are aware, they can kind of tell when someone is, reading off of a paper or trying to remember what they were supposed to say. And especially with storytelling, if it's an experience that someone has had, the story is already within you. Um, Word choice matters, but don't lose your audience for shock value. So like I had mentioned, when you're thinking about emotions, you're thinking about compelling someone or someone that really does have an opposing view, it may be tempting to really tap their emotions strongly. Um, I think there's just a balance with that because, if you shock somebody, you overwhelm them too much, or you offend them in some way. It can dim your story, it can dim your ask because now they're focused on, trying to cope with what you said, trying to process it. So it's like going back to talking about your new tennis shoes and when you bought it and what store. Just trying to not to distract the listener of the story with other things. There's just a way to kind of use different language that might not, you could still say the same thing and it wouldn't upset someone as much or just really be very strong. So plan for less time than what you have. I wrote that for me. That was advice, Valerie, to Valerie there because I tend to go on a little bit long. So it's best for me personally. So I'll share that with you all. Maybe it'll help you too. Um, it Time seems to go. It just goes faster when you're actually in storytelling mode than when you're practicing and planning. So be cautious about including other people's stories within your own, especially your child's. I think this one is really important. I don't hear people talk about it a lot. But like going into like storytelling for child welfare, you could be a birth parent that is trying to advocate about what foster care is like. And if you go into the story and you start saying something like, I would like to advocate for more supports for parents and for children to stay in the home with those supports. Family should stay together if possible. My child went to foster care. It was a really devastating experience for them. They were coming home for visits and they were wetting themselves at 13 years old. And that's how I knew that things weren't going very well. It sounds great and it's part of advocating, but just being mindful that that 13-year-old is going to be an adult one day. And I don't think people want to be their information just floating around like that. People are going to know when they're an adult that they were having accidents at 13 years old because you threw that in the story. So, just being mindful of not telling other people's story when you're telling your story unless you have their permission. So just a way to do that differently would have been, that the foster care experience was really hard for us, and there were adverse effects with my child while they were in that situation. Don't have to really get into it. And then you can tell specifics about you and how you were affected if that's what you're comfortable with. Just be mindful when you're telling your story, unless you have someone else's permission, not to overshare on their experience. All right, we can go to the next slide. So I have this activity here. We don't actually have to do it, because I'm just presenting right now to you all, but something to think about. And even going back to, just mentioning that everybody's a storyteller. So I gave a couple of examples during this call today about safety. Well, pedestrian safety was one. I talked about food. I talked about child welfare a little bit. And so when there are decisions being made, when we're talking about advocacy, uh, this is an image of like a target, a map or whatever. And just think about, when you're advocating for something, or you are helping somebody else to advocate for something, where do you fall in proximity to what you're talking about? And that can kind of impact whether you should be like the listener at that point, whether you could be the storyteller, or whether you could consider bringing in somebody to tell a story. And so when we're looking at this image here, the center would be you're directly impacted, you're directly hit. This is something that you are experiencing. So going back to food, you are one of those families that your children experience hunger, or your whole family. So that would be the direct hit. So as we go out into the green and the purple and the outer layers, that would be further away. So the green, that could include that maybe you don't experience hunger per se, but you live in a neighborhood where there are families that do. It could be that you directly serve people through your professional role that are experiencing it. And then as we kind of get out into the furthest layer, that would be no experience with the issues. You don't directly serve this. Nobody in your neighborhood looks like this, has been through this, and you're just really far removed. And so if you are someone that is directly impacted, you're in the center of everything, you are well positioned to be that storyteller, to speak truth to what that is like. And you would want to go out and find people in those other layers. And then as you kind of get in those middle layers, you might want to consider, who do I serve or know in my neighborhood that I could bring in to tell a story. And definitely when you're in the decision making aspect and you're all the way in the outside, you would want to go into all the other layers and say, well, I'm trying to make a decision on this. I don't have any personal experience with it. I don't know anybody that's gone through this. Let me bring in service providers and organizations who serve people that are experiencing this, and then also let me hear from someone directly as well. And so where we have this map here, this isn't like a black and white situation where you either know and you have experience or you don't, because people, depending on what you're advocating for and what you're talking about, could fall in different spaces at different times. So if we jump into childcare, there most parents have some experience with childcare. That could be a lot of people that are directly impacted by the topic of childcare. If you go specifically into childcare assistance, that could be something different. That maybe there are some that have childcare experience. There could be some that have childcare assistance experience. And then you could go even deeper and say, okay, well, people that have had childcare assistance that were taken off of assistance when they still needed it. And so it just depending on what you're talking about, people can fall in. There could be someone that had childcare experience who never had food access barriers. There could be someone that wants stop signs who never had childcare. So depending on what you're talking about, you may be direct in the middle, you may be in the middle, and you may be on the out, and you could be all over the place. Depending on how many advocacy areas you focus on and what you would like to see changed. And so I think if you want to take this a little step further, we won't get into this today, but also just being mindful of knowing where you are on this map. If you are not the storyteller at that moment and you're supporting someone else to be a storyteller, just thinking about your readiness to do that, and, remembering from today, like, why you would want to bring them into the conversation. And that is it for today. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Valerie. So we have a couple of minutes real quick if anyone has questions, comments they want to ask. Can answer questions about the presentation, also about Children's Advocacy Week generally. Say, I'm not seeing any come through, but if any questions please feel free to reach out to me, Valerie, or anyone at KYA, and we'd be happy to help. Give some more tips, advice, ways to find data, ways to tell stories, any of that. So thank you all once again so much for being here with us today. We really, really appreciate your time on this Tuesday and for you celebrating Children's Advocacy Week with us. Like I said at the beginning, and as you can see on the screen, this is not the end of Children's Advocacy Week, and we have a lot more events coming up throughout the week that we would love to have you there, including our rally and advocacy day at the Capitol tomorrow. So once again, thank you all for being here. We hope to see you the rest of the week, and thank you to all of our sponsors for your support.